Why would a warming planet make some places much, much colder? This story begins high in the Swiss Alps, where the air is thin and sharp. A deep and surprising freeze has settled over the mountains and valleys. Temperatures have plunged to a bitter 15 degrees below 0 Celsius. This intense cold seems to contradict the idea of global warming, but scientists say this event is a direct result of it. Our journey will explore this unsettling and important climate puzzle. We will listen to the people who live through this extreme cold. We will hear from researchers at institutions like ETH Zurich. This is the quiet story of a freezing world in flux. Did winters here always feel so strange and unpredictable and broken? For generations, the alpine rhythm was a reliable and steady heartbeat. Snow arrived generously and coated every peak and rooftop by November. The cold was firm but expected, a dry chill under brilliant blue skies. Communities planned their entire year around this stable and trusted pattern. Ski resorts opened on time, and farmers knew when to move animals. The deep freeze of January was a normal part of life's cycle. This reliability is documented in decades of data from Meteo Swiss. People felt a deep connection to their environment and its seasons. That familiar world, however, has slowly started to fade away. When did the first quiet cracks in their ancient winter finally begin to show? The change began not with a crash, but with a subtle and slow whisper. Scientists at the Swiss Federal Institute for Forest, Snow, and Landscape Research noticed odd shifts. Snowfall patterns became less reliable and more intense but shorter in duration. Warmer autumns would delay the first true frost by several weeks. Then a sudden and severe cold snap would arrive out of its time. The glaciers, eternal symbols of the Alps, began to retreat at alarming speeds. This melting is recorded by the Swiss Glacier Monitoring Network year after year. The very foundation of their cold world was becoming softer and less stable. A deep unease started growing among those who watched the mountains closely. What clear signals did people choose to ignore as the world warmed? The early warnings were not loud sirens, but quiet and consistent observations. Older guides noticed the mountain passes thawing earlier each spring, decade after decade. The lake ice became too thin for the traditional winter markets by the 1990s. The WSL Institute for Snow and Avalanche Research recorded decreasing snowpack depth. Some winters brought heavy snow, but it would vanish during a warm February. Farmers saw confused plants budding too early, only to be killed by frost. These were all pieces of a larger and deeply troubling climate puzzle. The data was clear to those who collected it and studied it carefully. Yet the disconnect between science and daily life remained far too wide. How can a single winter now feel like several broken and conflicting seasons? The weather itself has turned deeply strange and unpredictable across the Alps. One week may bring heavy rain and strangely warm winds to the valleys. The next week plunges the same villages into a deep and paralyzing Arctic freeze. Meteorologists at Meteo Swiss track these wild and sudden atmospheric swings. They note rain falling in January where only snow should ever fall. They record summer snow on high meadows that should be green. This inconsistency breaks the ancient rhythm of mountain life completely. The reliable calendar of seasons has been replaced by chaotic weather whiplash. People now dress in layers every day, never knowing what will come.
Why does the cold now feel so much more severe and dangerous and personal? This deep freeze grows stronger, lasting for weeks instead of just a few days. The -15-degree air grips everything and will not let go. Pipes freeze solid inside homes built to withstand normal winter conditions. Roads crack open with new and expanding frost heaves almost every night. The very rocks of the mountains fracture in the relentless extreme cold. This prolonged deep freeze is documented by the Swiss Seismological Service. Their instruments record the constant popping of stone under intense thermal stress. Animals cannot find food under the thick ice covering the frozen ground. The cold is no longer a simple fact of life, but an active threat. What normal sound becomes a terrifying roar when the mountain falls? The big disaster often arrives as a sudden and crushing avalanche of snow. These avalanches now happen in unusual places and at strange times of year. The Institute for Snow and Avalanche Research, SLF, issues urgent high-danger warnings. Entire villages are cut off from power and from help for days. Rescue helicopters cannot fly in the continuing violent and blinding snowstorms. A single slide can bury roads and homes under tons of solid ice. This event transforms the beautiful landscape into a deadly and silent trap. The deep freeze creates unstable layers within the snowpack high above. People wait in fear, listening to the wind, knowing the danger is real. What does a person's voice sound like when their world is changing? The deep cold comes too fast now after a wet autumn, he says quietly. My grandfather knew the patterns, but I no longer recognize them. A mountain guide from Zermatt looks up at the unstable peaks above. We see more ice where there was only firm snow before, she explains. Researchers from the University of Bern interview hundreds of residents every year. The stories they collect all share a common thread of confusion and loss. The cold feels different. It feels wrong, says a hotel owner from Interlaken. These are not just complaints about weather, but testimonies of a breaking normal. The human voice becomes the most important data point of all. How does a simple daily routine quietly become impossible during the freeze? Daily life breaks down in small but deeply troubling ways across the region. The simple act of driving to work or school becomes a major risk. Schools close frequently because heating systems fail under the extreme cold stress. Local shops cannot receive fresh food deliveries due to blocked mountain passes. The Swiss Federal Energy Office reports record strain on the power grid. Hospitals see more injuries from falls on ice and cases of hypothermia. Community events and social gatherings are canceled for weeks on end. The isolation wraps around each village like an additional layer of frost. The fabric of normal daily existence is slowly unraveling thread by thread. Is fear something you can actually hold in your hands every single day? A doctor in a small clinic sees this fear in the eyes of parents. They worry their children will get sick when the heating system fails again. An elder in the village feels fear for the loss of ancient stories and traditions. These traditions are tied to seasons that no longer behave as they should. A school teacher fears for her students' future in a changing landscape. The Swiss Alpine Club documents climbers' fears over unstable rock and ice. A scientist from the University of Basel speaks of a different kind of fear. It is the fear of data trends that point only toward more disruption. Each person carries a quiet, cold weight that is very hard to share.
What solid proof exists beyond our feelings of a changing cold world? The facts come from decades of careful measurement by Swiss scientific institutions. Meteoswiss data shows a clear 2 degrees Celsius warming trend nationally. This warming trend is actually accelerating faster than the global average rate. The Swiss Glacier Monitoring Network measures devastating ice loss every single year. They have observed a total loss of 60% of glacier volume since 1850. The WSL Institute records a 30% decrease in spring snowpack since 1970. The Federal Office for the Environment confirms more frequent temperature extremes. These numbers form an undeniable and very consistent story of deep change. The evidence is written in the melting ice and the shifting snow lines. Why does a warmer Arctic actually cause colder winters here in Europe? The answer involves a powerful high-altitude wind called the jet stream. This river of air normally circles the pole and keeps the coldest air locked. Scientists from ETH Zurich study how rapid Arctic warming weakens this wind. A slower jet stream begins to wobble and bend in huge meandering waves. These waves can push frigid polar air far south into Europe and Asia. This process is explained by researchers at the University of Reading, too. The bitter cold over Switzerland is a piece of that escaping polar air. So our deep freeze is a direct symptom of a feverish Arctic region. The Earth's climate system is connected in surprising and often counterintuitive ways. How can two opposite ideas both be true in our new climate reality? The climate change connection is solidly established by international science. The UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports this with high confidence. A warming planet increases the energy and water vapor in our atmosphere. This extra energy makes our weather patterns more intense and more stuck. It can strengthen heat waves, droughts, and also push cold air southwards. The extreme cold event in Switzerland is a part of this global disruption. ETH Zurich climate scientists model and confirm these complex chain reactions. Our old definitions of normal weather are becoming obsolete and unhelpful. The paradox is real. Human-driven warming can drive severe local cold. Who quietly carries the greatest risk when the deep and unexpected freeze arrives? The elderly and very young children face immediate health dangers from the cold. People with heart conditions are at serious risk during intense physical exertion. Outdoor workers and mountain guides face direct exposure to the deadly elements daily. Low-income families struggle terribly with soaring heating costs during long cold spells. The Swiss Red Cross specifically monitors these vulnerable groups every winter. Remote mountain communities become isolated and cut off from critical medical services. Tourism workers and small business owners face economic ruin from lost seasons. But the risk also extends silently to the natural world and its creatures. Alpine species like the mountain hare and ptarmigan cannot adapt so quickly. What hidden cost now dominates every single household budget and conversation here? The hidden cost of staying warm now dominates every household budget and conversation. People must choose between heating their homes and buying other necessary things like food. The Swiss Federal Office of Energy confirms electricity demand spikes dangerously during these freezes. Families seal windows with plastic film and hang thick curtains over every door. Community centers open as warming shelters for those who cannot heat homes. The simple act of sleeping requires multiple blankets and thermal sleeping bags. Daily life now involves constant preparation for the next inevitable utility failure.
Schools teach children about frostbite and the layers needed to go outside. Jobs slowly shift away from outdoor work that is now too dangerous.
What permanent scar does this freeze leave upon the land and the human heart? The long-term damage is measured in vanished glaciers and crumbling mountain paths. UNESCO warns that alpine cultural heritage is now under severe climate threat. Traditional knowledge about weather and farming becomes useless and irrelevant each year. The Glacier Monitoring Network notes some smaller glaciers have already disappeared forever. This loss changes the very shape of the mountains people call home. The economic base of tourism and agriculture becomes fragile and uncertain. Scientists from ETH Zurich predict more infrastructure damage from repeated freeze-thaw cycles. The landscape itself holds less water for springs and rivers in summer. The damage is environmental, economic, and deeply personal for every resident here. Can we ever truly repair the damage already done to this fragile frozen world? We cannot reverse all the changes already set in motion by past warming. But we can still prevent the very worst outcomes from happening in our future. The Swiss Federal Office for the Environment has a detailed adaptation plan. It involves protecting towns with new forests that guard against avalanches and slides. It requires changing building codes for stronger roofs and better insulation. The world must follow the IPCC roadmap to cut greenhouse gas emissions fast. Early warning systems for extreme cold and heat must become much better. Communities must learn new ways to manage water from glaciers that are melting. Our choices now will decide how much more the mountains will change. Where do you find a small seed of hope in a landscape of deep loss? Local engineers are designing new snow management systems for high mountain villages. Farmers are working with scientists to breed more resilient crops for cold snaps. The Swiss Federal Institute of Technology tests new geothermal heating for entire communities. Volunteer networks check on isolated elderly residents every day during deep freezes. School programs now teach children about climate adaptation alongside traditional subjects. Artists create works that help people mourn and process the changing Alps. These actions are small stitches repairing the torn fabric of community life. They represent a quiet determination to adapt and to care for each other. This collective effort is the true and enduring warmth against the cold. This story is not just about cold weather in a distant mountain range. It is about the fundamental connection between all people and our shared climate. The deep freeze in Switzerland carries a warning for the entire world to hear. Our planet's systems are connected in delicate and often surprising ways. A change in the Arctic can reshape life in the Alps and far beyond. The data from scientists gives us the clearest picture of our future. The stories from people give that data its necessary and human heart. We must learn to listen to both the numbers and the voices carefully. Our response will define the world we all choose to live in. The quiet truth is that we are all witnesses to this great change.